I had a wrench in my hand and grease on my face when the guard's cruiser blocked my driveway. After 20 years in construction, I'd finally bought a fixer-upper in Pleasant Pines, the neighborhood I helped build. The irony wasn't lost on me that now, on my rare day off, some rent-a-cop was preventing me from leaving my own property over a measly $200 fee I never actually owed. "Sir, you need to pay your outstanding balance before you can leave the premises," the guard said, his voice monotone as he adjusted his ill-fitting uniform. The patch on his chest read, "Hillcrest Security," but I knew exactly who had sent him. "I paid my dues last month," I said, wiping my hands on a shop rag. "There's been a mistake." "Mrs. Harrington was very clear," he replied, checking his clipboard. "Unit 47 is delinquent on landscaping compliance fees. Vehicle exit is restricted until payment is received. Patty Harrington." Of course. The self-appointed queen of Pleasant Pines HOA had been making my life difficult since the day I moved in. What she didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that I, Derek Howard, was more than just the guy in the shabby rancher with the old pickup truck. I was the entire reason Pleasant Pines existed. "Could you call Mrs. Harrington for me?" I asked, forcing politeness into my voice. "I'd like to discuss this with her directly." The guard hesitated, then nodded and stepped away to make the call. I watched as he spoke quietly into his radio, occasionally glancing my way with increasing confusion. 10 minutes later, a gleaming white Mercedes SUV with PPE vanity plates pulled up behind the security cruiser. Patty Harrington emerged, designer sunglasses perched on her nose despite the cloudy day, her blonde highlights freshly done. At 50-something, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent decades getting exactly what she wanted. "Mr. Howard," she said, her voice syrupy with false pleasantry. "We seem to have a situation here." "We do," I agreed. "Your guard is blocking my driveway illegally." Her smile tightened. "Nothing illegal about enforcing our HOA covenants. You're behind on your special assessment fees." "What special assessment fees?" She pulled out her tablet with a flourish. "The board approved emergency landscaping remediation last month. Your property borders the main entrance, and your eclectic garden choices have been deemed non-compliant." By eclectic, she meant the native plant garden I'd installed to replace the water-guzzling lawn. It was drought-resistant, supported local wildlife, and looked a hell of a lot more interesting than the sterile green rectangles that dominated the neighborhood. "I never received notice of any assessment," I said. "It was emailed to all residents." She flashed her tablet at me, showing an email sent to residents@pleasantpeninsula.org. "I'm not on that distribution list," I said. "I've asked 3 times to be added." Her smile never faltered. "Administrative oversight, I'm sure. Nevertheless, the fee is due. $200, plus the $50 late fee." I crossed my arms. "I'm not paying for a fee I wasn't properly notified about, for an assessment I don't agree with, to fix something that isn't broken." Something glinted in her eyes, something hard and cold. "Then I'm afraid you won't be leaving your driveway today, Mr. Howard." The security guard shifted uncomfortably beside his vehicle. "Ma'am," he started. "I'm not sure we can legally." "You can and you will," she snapped. "The HOA bylaws clearly state that the association may restrict access to community amenities for non-payment." "My driveway isn't a community amenity," I pointed out. "But the roads are," she countered smoothly. "And to reach the roads, you must cross HOA property." I sighed deeply. I hadn't wanted it to come to this. For 3 years, I'd lived quietly in my modest home, flying under the radar while Patty and her minions ran the neighborhood like their personal fiefdom. I'd watched as they foreclosed on the Millers when Mr. Miller was deployed overseas. I'd seen them fine Mrs. Gomez, a widow on a fixed income, for having a bird feeder that was the wrong shade of brown. I'd stayed silent because I'd wanted to live like a regular homeowner, not the man who actually owned the whole damn place. But some battles you can't avoid. "Call your supervisor," I told the guard. He looked at Patty, who narrowed her eyes. "I am the supervisor," she said. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association. I smiled thinly. Not his supervisor. Call Curtis at Hillcrest Security Headquarters. The guard's eyes widened slightly in recognition. He took a few steps away and spoke quietly into his radio again. What are you doing? Patty demanded, her voice losing its polished edge. Resolving this situation, I replied. The guard returned, his demeanor completely changed. Mrs. Harrington, I've been instructed to remove the vehicle immediately. I apologize for the inconvenience, Mr. Howard. What? Patty's voice rose an octave. You work for me. The HOA pays your company. Actually, I interjected, Pleasant Pines Enterprises pays Hillcrest Security. And I own Pleasant Pines Enterprises. The color drained from her face. That's impossible. The development company was bought by a private investor years ago. That private investor was me, I said quietly. I started as a contractor here, saved every penny, and when the original developer went bankrupt during the housing crash, I mortgaged everything I had to buy it. The guard was already moving his cruiser. Patty stood frozen in place, her tablet clutched against her chest like a shield. You're lying, she whispered, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. I pulled out my wallet and handed her my business card. It was simple. Derek Howard, owner, Pleasant Pines Enterprises. I live here because I built these homes, I said. I care about this community. But I've watched you and your board twist the HOA into something it was never meant to be. Patty stared at the card, then at me, the wheels visibly turning behind her eyes. Then, astonishingly, she laughed, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. Well, Mr. Howard. How interesting. I suppose we'll be in touch. She turned on her heel and stalked back to her Mercedes, her posture rigid. As she drove away, I had the distinct feeling this wasn't over. It was just beginning. I was right. The following morning, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. The HOA board had called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to increase the special assessment to $1,000 per household to address critical infrastructure concerns. It was dated the same day as our confrontation, but somehow had already been processed and mailed. I laughed out loud, standing in my driveway. Did Patty really think I wouldn't have access to the HOA's financial records? As the property owner, I received copies of everything, even the documents the board didn't share with residents. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting, scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community clubhouse. I had never gone before, preferring to keep my ownership private, but it was time to see exactly what Patty Harrington had been doing with her power. When I arrived, the small room was already packed. About 30 homeowners sat in folding chairs, facing a table where Patty and 4 other board members perched importantly. I recognized Tom Fletcher, a retired accountant, Lisa Morrison, who ran the neighborhood watch with militant enthusiasm, Greg Daniels, a local realtor who'd sold half the homes in the development, and Sarah Peterson, Patty's best friend and yes-woman. I slipped into a seat in the back as Patty called the meeting to order. Before we begin our regular agenda, she announced, I'd like to address the special assessment that was approved last week. Several residents have expressed concerns about the amount. A balding man in the front row raised his hand. It's more than tripled from what you told us last month. That's not a concern, that's highway robbery. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Patty's smile remained fixed. The initial assessment was inadequate for the scope of work required. Our treasurer, Tom, has prepared a detailed breakdown. Tom cleared his throat and distributed photocopied spreadsheets. I took one and immediately spotted 3 inflated line items and 1 complete fabrication, a $50,000 consulting fee, with no named recipient. As you can see, Tom continued, the retention pond requires substantial repairs, and the entrance landscaping needs complete renovation. My company inspected that retention pond last year, said a woman 2 rows ahead of me. It's in perfect condition. With all due respect, Mrs. Chin, Patty said in a tone that held no respect whatsoever. The board has consulted with experts. Which experts? Someone else called out. Pinecrest Consulting, Tom replied smoothly. They're specialists in community infrastructure. I pulled out my phone and did a quick search. Pinecrest Consulting had been incorporated 6 months ago. Its registered address was a UPS store. Its only listed officer was P. Harrington. I raised my hand. Patty's gaze swept past me as if I were invisible. Are there any other questions about items actually on our agenda? She asked pointedly. I stood up. I have a question about the consulting fee. All eyes turned to me. Recognition flickered across Patty's face, followed by something that looked remarkably like fear before her professional mask slipped back into place. Mr. Howard, she said. How unexpected. The board welcomes all residents, of course, but questions must pertain to the current agenda items. This is pertaining to your agenda, I replied. I'm curious about Pinecrest Consulting. Specifically, I'm wondering why the HOA is paying $50,000 to a company you personally own, Mrs. Harrington. The room went silent. Tom Fletcher shuffled his papers nervously. That's a ridiculous accusation. I held up my phone, displaying the business registration. Public record. Patty's smile had become a grimace. The board approved this expenditure unanimously. There's no conflict of interest because I recused myself from the vote. Did you inform the board that you were the sole owner of the company? I asked. The other board members exchanged glances. Lisa Morrison's expression darkened. I was not made aware of this, she said stiffly. Neither was I, added Greg Daniels. Only Sarah Peterson remained silent, suddenly fascinated by her manicure. Patty's composure cracked slightly. This is not the appropriate forum for these discussions. We have an agenda to follow. I think it's exactly the right forum, I countered. While we're at it, let's discuss the $75,000 the HOA paid last year to Harrington Landscape Design, your brother's company, for work that was never completed. The mood in the room shifted palpably. Confusion gave way to anger as homeowners began whispering to each other. Or perhaps, I continued, we should talk about the HOA's legal defense fund, which has somehow accumulated over $100,000 despite no pending litigation. How would you know that? Patty demanded, her voice rising. Those are confidential board documents. And there it was, her admission that the board was keeping financial information from the homeowners who funded it. Nothing about the HOA's finances should be confidential from its members, I said. And as it happens, I have access to all of Pleasant Pine's financial records. Patty stood abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. You can't adjourn it, called out Mrs. Chin. We haven't voted. As president, I have the authority. Actually, I interrupted. According to the bylaws, Article 3, Section 2, a meeting can only be adjourned by majority vote of members present unless there's an emergency. Lisa Morrison stood up. I move that we continue the meeting. Seconded, said half a dozen voices. All in favor? Greg Daniels asked, clearly abandoning Patty's sinking ship. Nearly every hand in the room went up. Patty's face flushed red. This is inappropriate. I need to consult with our attorney. By all means, I said. Call Mitchell Sanders. Though he might be busy, considering the ethics complaint I filed this morning regarding his simultaneous representation of both the HOA and your private business interests. She grabbed her designer handbag and stormed toward the exit. Sarah, come on. Sarah Peterson looked torn, then slowly shook her head. I think I should stay, Patty. The door slammed behind the HOA president. The remaining board members looked shell-shocked. Who exactly are you? Greg Daniels asked me. I'm Derek Howard. I own Pleasant Pines Enterprises, which owns this development. A buzz of conversation erupted. I held up my hands. I'm also just a homeowner, like all of you. I built these houses, and I chose to live here because I believe in this community. But I've watched as the HOA has been weaponized against the people it's supposed to serve. If you own the development, why haven't you stopped it? Mrs. Chin asked. It was a fair question. Because HOAs are meant to be democratic institutions run by homeowners, I explained. I didn't want to override that. But when I see funds being embezzled and homeowners being bullied, I can't stay silent anymore. For the next hour, we had the most productive HOA meeting in Pleasant Pines history. The homeowners voted to conduct a forensic audit of the HOA's finances, to cancel the special assessment, and to hold emergency elections for new board members in 2 weeks. As the meeting wrapped up, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. You have no idea who you're dealing with." I should have taken the threat more seriously. 2 days later, I returned home from work to find my front door ajar. Inside, my house had been ransacked, drawers emptied, furniture overturned, electronics smashed. On my kitchen table lay a single piece of paper, a forged deed transfer, appearing to show that I'd signed over Pleasant Pines Enterprises to Patricia Harrington 3 years ago. It was a crude forgery, but disturbing nonetheless. I called the police immediately. Officer Jenkins arrived 20 minutes later, a young cop who looked barely old enough to drink. He walked through my house, taking photographs and notes. "Any idea who might have done this, Mr. Howard?" I handed him Patty's threatening text and explained our conflict. He frowned. "Mrs. Harrington? The HOA president? She's very well respected in the community. Her husband is deputy mayor." Of course. The Harrington connections ran deep. "Just investigate the break-in," I said. "And I'd like to report an attempted fraud as well." I handed him the forged document. He took it reluctantly. "I'll file the report, but without witnesses or video evidence, these cases are hard to solve." After he left, I called my security company and had cameras installed that same evening. Then I called my attorney, Caroline Wells, and explained the situation. "This is serious, Derek," she said. "If she's willing to break into your home and forge documents, she might not stop there. What should I do?" "Document everything. And maybe dig deeper into the HOA's finances. If she's been embezzling funds, that's a felony." The next morning, I called in a favor from my old friend Marcus, a forensic accountant who specialized in fraud cases. He agreed to examine 5 years' worth of HOA financial records. 3 days later, Marcus called me. "Derek, you need to see this. It's worse than we thought." We met at his office downtown. Spread across his desk were printouts, bank statements, and color-coded spreadsheets. "Patty Harrington has stolen approximately $430,000 from the HOA over the past 5 years, he said without preamble. "She's been laundering it through fake vendors, inflated maintenance contracts, and phantom consulting fees." I whistled. "That's a lot more than I expected." "It gets worse. Some of these fraudulent payments went to companies owned by Judge Franklin Harrington, her husband. If he knew about this, that's corruption on top of fraud." The pieces were falling into place. No wonder Officer Jenkins had been dismissive. No wonder the HOA attorney never questioned Patty's decisions. The Harringtons had built themselves a perfect little kingdom in Pleasant Pines, protected by the deputy mayor's influence. "I need to take this to the county prosecutor," I said. Marcus nodded gravely. "Be careful, Derek. People who've been getting away with this kind of thing for years don't just roll over when exposed." I was about to find out how right he was. That evening, as I pulled into my driveway, a police cruiser was waiting. Officer Jenkins stepped out, accompanied by a senior officer. "Derek Howard?" the senior officer asked. "I'm Sergeant Phillips. We have a warrant for your arrest." "For what?" "Fraud and embezzlement from Pleasant Pines Homeowners Association." I stared in disbelief as they handcuffed me and read me my rights. Through the patrol car window, I spotted Patty Harrington watching from her Mercedes parked down the street, a satisfied smile on her face. At the station, I was fingerprinted and photographed, then led to an interview room where Sergeant Phillips laid out the case against me: forged checks, fabricated invoices, and a witness statement from Patty Harrington claiming I had confessed to stealing HOA funds during our confrontation at my driveway. "This is all fabricated," I said. Patty Harrington is framing me because I discovered her embezzlement scheme. Sergeant Phillips looked skeptical. Mrs. Harrington provided bank records showing transfers from the HOA account to your personal account. Those are forgeries. Call my bank. We have. It took 3 hours and my attorney's arrival to begin unraveling the mess. Caroline brought copies of my actual bank statements and evidence of the break-in at my house. She also brought Marcus, who presented his preliminary findings on Patty's embezzlement. Sergeant Phillips' demeanor slowly changed as he reviewed the evidence. This is concerning, he admitted. But I still have evidence you received HOA funds. Check the routing numbers on those transfers, Marcus suggested. I bet they don't match Derek's actual account. They didn't. Someone had created fake bank statements showing non-existent transfers. I was released on my own recognizance at midnight, with the charges not dropped but under review. As we left the station, Caroline looked grim. Judge Harrington will be presiding over your arraignment, she said. Patricia's husband. That's a clear conflict of interest. In a perfect world, he'd recuse himself. But the Harringtons don't appear to play by the rules. The next morning, I decided it was time to go nuclear. I called every homeowner in Pleasant Pines and invited them to an emergency community meeting at my house that evening. Then I contacted the local newspaper, sharing the evidence of the Harringtons' fraud scheme. By 6 o'clock, my backyard was packed with concerned neighbors. I distributed copies of Marcus's financial analysis, highlighting the most egregious examples of Patty's theft. For 5 years, I told them, the Harringtons have been using our HOA fees as their personal piggy bank. When I discovered this, Patty broke into my home, planted forged documents, and had me arrested on false charges. Outrage spread through the crowd. Even those who had been Patty's supporters couldn't ignore the evidence. What can we do? Asked Mrs. Chin. If her husband is a judge, we go above his head, I said. I've already contacted the State Bar Association regarding Judge Harrington's ethics violations. But we need to act as a community too. We formulated a plan. Every homeowner would file a formal complaint with the county prosecutor's office. We would demand a full investigation by the state police, bypassing the local department that might be under the Harringtons' influence. And we would call an emergency HOA meeting to remove Patty from the board. As the meeting concluded, headlights swept across my house. A white Mercedes pulled into my driveway, and Patty Harrington emerged, her face contorted with rage. What the hell do you think you're doing? She demanded, storming toward the gathered homeowners. This is an unauthorized HOA meeting. It's not an HOA meeting, I replied calmly. It's just neighbors gathering to discuss community concerns. She spotted the documents in people's hands. What are those? Are you spreading lies about me? Tom Fletcher, the HOA treasurer, stepped forward. They're bank statements, Patty. HOA bank statements showing withdrawals that never went to the vendors they were supposed to pay. You have no right to those documents, she sputtered. Actually, as treasurer, I have every right, Tom replied. I should have checked them more carefully before. That's on me. Patty's eyes darted around the crowd, searching for allies and finding none. For the first time, she looked afraid. You're all making a huge mistake, she said, her voice dropping to a threatening tone. My husband will likely be facing his own investigation, I interrupted, for accepting money from HOA funds laundered through your fake companies. Her face went pale. You can't prove anything. The bank records prove everything, said Marcus, stepping forward with a thick folder. I've been a forensic accountant for 20 years, Mrs. Harrington. You're not particularly sophisticated in your methods. For a moment, I thought Patty might collapse. Then her expression hardened. Fine. You want a war, Derek Howard? You've got one. She stalked back to her car and peeled out of my driveway, nearly hitting Mrs. Chen's husband in her haste. The next morning, I woke to the sound of bulldozers. Looking out my window, I saw construction equipment tearing up the street in front of my house. Workers in Pleasant Pines maintenance uniforms were digging a massive trench, completely blocking access to my driveway. I threw on clothes and hurried outside. "What's going on here?" The foreman looked up from his clipboard. "Emergency water main repair. Should take about 2 weeks." "There's nothing wrong with the water main," I said. "I built this neighborhood." He shrugged. "Just following orders from the HOA, sir." I pulled out my phone and called Curtis at Hillcrest Security. "Curtis, who authorized construction work on Pine Blossom Street?" "Let me check. Looks like Mrs. Harrington approved it yesterday evening. Emergency repair authorization. As the property owner, I'm countermanding that authorization. Please send security to shut it down immediately." 15 minutes later, 2 security vehicles arrived. The construction crew protested but ultimately packed up their equipment. As they departed, I spotted Patty watching from her SUV at the end of the street. She didn't approach, just observed with cold calculation before driving away. That afternoon, I received a call from Caroline. "Derek, Judge Harrington has recused himself from your case." "That's good news." "Yes and no. The case has been reassigned to Judge Moore, Franklin Harrington's former law partner." The Harringtons' influence ran deep. But the walls were starting to close in on them. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the Pleasant Pines HOA investigation. 3 more homeowners came forward with stories of excessive fines and harassment by Patty. And the State Bar Association had opened a formal inquiry into Judge Harrington's potential ethics violations. 2 days before my arraignment, everything came to a head. I was working in my garage when I heard a car pull into my driveway. Through the window, I recognized Sarah Peterson, Patty's friend and HOA board ally. She looked nervous as I greeted her. "Mr. Howard, I need to talk to you. Privately." I led her into my kitchen. She declined coffee, perching on the edge of a chair like she might need to flee at any moment. "I've been Patty's friend for 15 years, she began. "I've looked the other way on a lot of things because, well, that's what friends do, right?" I waited, saying nothing. "But this has gone too far. She's talking crazy now. Last night, she was at my house, drinking wine and saying she was going to solve the Derek Howard problem once and for all." A chill ran down my spine. "What exactly did she say?" "She said sometimes old houses have electrical problems. Faulty wiring." Sarah's voice trembled. "I think she's planning something terrible, Mr. Howard. I came to warn you because I can't have that on my conscience." I thanked her for coming forward and immediately called the police. Sergeant Phillips arrived himself, taking Sarah's statement with newfound seriousness. He promised to station a patrol car near my house that night. After they left, I checked all my smoke detectors and installed a few more. I also set up motion-activated cameras around the exterior of my house. If Patty was planning what I thought she was planning, I wanted evidence. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak and groan of my old house had me sitting upright, listening for intruders. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with an alert from my security system. Someone was in my backyard. The camera feed showed a figure in dark clothing moving stealthily toward my back door, carrying what looked like a gas can. I called 911 immediately, then watched in disbelief as Patty Harrington, her face clearly visible when she glanced up at one of my security lights, began pouring liquid around the foundation of my house. The patrol car arrived within minutes, silent but with lights flashing. Patty didn't notice until the officers were already in my backyard. They caught her literally red-handed, with gasoline on her gloves and a lighter in her pocket. As they led her away in handcuffs, she locked eyes with me standing in my doorway. There was no remorse there, only cold fury and something like disbelief that her plan had failed. The aftermath unfolded quickly. Patty was charged with attempted arson, breaking and entering, and fraud. Judge Harrington resigned from the bench the next day, just ahead of his own indictment for corruption and money laundering. My case was dismissed with prejudice. At an emergency meeting, the Pleasant Pines homeowners voted unanimously to dissolve the current HOA board and elect new leadership. The forensic audit revealed that nearly a third of all HOA fees collected over 5 years had been diverted to the Harringtons' personal use. 6 months later, I sat in the courthouse watching as Patty Harrington pled guilty to multiple felonies in exchange for a reduced sentence of 5 years. Her husband received 3 years for his role in the scheme. As she was led away, Patty didn't look in my direction, her former imperious demeanor replaced by defeated resignation. Outside the courthouse, several of my neighbors were waiting. "Is it really over?" asked Mrs. Chin. "The criminal part is," I said. "Now we rebuild our community." Tom Fletcher, who had been elected the new HOA president, extended his hand. "We've been talking, Derek. We'd like you to join the board. With your experience as a builder and your commitment to the neighborhood, you'd be an asset." I hesitated. "I've always wanted to keep my ownership of the development separate from HOA governance." "We understand that," Mrs. Chin said. "But we need people who care about more than power. People who remember that an HOA exists to serve the community, not rule it." Looking at their earnest faces, I found myself nodding. "All right, I'm in. But just as a regular board member. No special treatment." As we walked toward our cars, I took a moment to look around at Pleasant Pines, the curved streets I had laid out, the houses I had built with my own hands, and the neighbors who had come together to save their community from corruption. I had never wanted to be known as the owner of the development. I had just wanted to be Derek, the guy in Unit 47 with the native plant garden. But sometimes the most important leadership happens when you stand up, not when you stand apart. The next board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening. I already had some ideas about reducing fees, increasing transparency, and maybe adding a community garden in that empty lot on Maple Street. But most importantly, I was going to propose a complete revision of the HOA bylaws, with input from every single homeowner. Because a community isn't defined by its rules or its appearance. It's defined by how it treats its members, especially when times are tough. And Pleasant Pines was finally on its way to becoming the community I had always envisioned when I laid that first foundation all those years ago.